So hello, today we have Daniel McPadden. He's an Iraqi War veteran, and he is going to talk to us about the Iraqi War. So, can you tell us anything about your time and during what time period you fought in Iraq?
Yeah, sure. So, I'll start off by saying that I was in the Army for 8 years, from 2007 to 2015. And the first couple of years I started off as an infantry officer. So around the 2008-2009 time frame, I was deployed to Iraq for about a year. And I spent most of my time in two cities in Iraq. First city was Kirkuk, and then the second city was Mosul. Both big cities, especially Mosul. Mosul has 3 million people in it. So yeah, that's where I spent the bulk of my time during my first deployment in Iraq.
Alright, so can you tell us any background information on the Iraq War? I've heard it started on March 20th, 2003, but you definitely joined a little bit later than that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I mean the background, it all kind of stems back to September 11th, 2001. I mean, after those attacks, it launched our entire country and our military on a whole new trajectory. I mean, it changed everything. Suddenly we found ourselves going after any country that presented themselves as sort of the axis of evil or harbored terrorism. Iraq, there was a long history with Saddam Hussein being just an evil dictator, and we definitely wanted to oust him. And then there was also reports that he had weapons of mass destruction, and that he was harboring terrorist networks there as well. So around the 2003 time frame, we made the decision to go into that country, get rid of Saddam Hussein, and basically prevent any dictator like him from coming there ever again. So during the initial invasion into Iraq in 2003, we went after Saddam and his military forces. It didn't take long to defeat them and get them out of there. And, we claimed a victory pretty soon. But I think one thing that we didn't foresee was the aftermath and the toll that would have on the local populace of Iraq. So in removing Saddam, who's a Sunni dictator, the U.S. military put in a Shiite president in Iraq. So, you can imagine just the uproar that would cause with the very sensitive nature of all the different religious groups in Iraq. I mean, everybody's sort of vying for power. And anytime you favor one religious group over another, it's going to cause a lot of turmoil and sectarian violence. And that's exactly what happened. You launched into this huge civil war in Iraq. A lot of infighting between different neighborhoods, different religious groups, and the U.S. military is sort of caught in the middle. So now from 2004 onward, we're having to deal with this sort of civil war, and we didn't quite know how to handle that. Fast forward to when I went in there in 2007, or I'm sorry, 2008. This is at the height of the counterinsurgency effort that the U.S. military is trying to deal with. So on top of the civil violence going on between Sunnis, Shiites, and others, you're also dealing with this insurgency population, which they support al-Qaida, they support terrorism, or they hate the U.S. They hate the fact that the U.S. government is in the country of Iraq, and they want to get us out any way possible. So yeah, around the 2008-2009 2009 timeframe, you know, me as a soldier in my unit there, we're dealing with a lot. You're dealing with civil war and this insurgency group. And that gets very tricky to navigate as far as how you deal with that stuff.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the counterinsurgency operation was and like what it means to be a counterinsurgency operator?
Yeah, sure. So basically, you know, a counterinsurgency network, it's a guerrilla force. You know, they're not conventional army. They're basically the rebels in that country. And they work in sort of an asymmetric fashion, right? They conduct asymmetric warfare. So they're not meeting you on the battlefield and carrying out conventional attacks against you. They're doing guerrilla warfare. They're carrying out ambushes. They're setting up IEDs, which is the improvised explosive devices, the roadside bombs. They're doing, you know, sniper attacks, all kinds of sneak attacks, and they're not playing fair. You know, that's a strategy. They don't play fair. So, yeah, it's basically it's a guerrilla force. They're the rebels in that country who've decided to kind of take things into their own hands, to band together and get the occupying force, which is us, the U.S. military, out of that country.
Okay, so what was your reason for joining the military, and how old were you?
Yeah, so, you know, I think I made the decision sort of my later years in high school to join the military. My father had served. He was in the Navy for almost 20 years. And, you know, so I already had an interest in going in. And then figure in 9/11, and that just solidified the decision. You know, from that point on, you know, I knew I wanted to go into the Army. You know, a lot of my friends were joining up too to go and fight. So, you know, that just seemed like the most logical decision. I didn't go straight in after high school. I went on to college and did ROTC there, which is sort of the officer training program that you go through when you're in college. So after college, I commissioned into the Army as a second lieutenant.
That's really interesting. What were you doing during 9/11 exactly during?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody can remember that day, exactly what they were doing. I was in class actually. I was a senior in high school, and I was in my first class of the day. It was a history class, and ironically, you know, the teacher. The topic was the Cuban Missile Crisis. So as part of that lesson, we were watching the movie 13 Days. So I remember watching that movie, and I was like, wow, that time period was so crazy. You know, just with, like, our country is on the brink of war with Russia, on the brink of nuclear disaster, and I was like, that must have been so crazy to, you know, to experience that situation, to live back then and go through that. You know, currently, you know, at that time, like, our country was in a relatively peaceful period, and there wasn't any major conflicts going on. Like, it just felt safe, and it was a time of peace. So as I'm watching that movie, the teacher comes in, and she's like, hey, you know, I have something to tell everybody. Planes have just flown into the World Trade Center, both towers, and we think we're under attack. She turned on the TV, and then, you know, there it was. You have these two symbols of America up in flames. And I had been to those towers when I was a kid. So to see those now just, you know, on the brink of collapsing, which, you know, a few hours later, you know, I witnessed those buildings on TV collapsing. It was surreal, and I think it really affected everybody and solid everybody's decision to go and fight. You know, anybody who had any interest in joining the military really solidified that decision to go off and fight and get revenge.
Okay. Is there a specific way that you impacted the outcome of the war as like a war stabilizer?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky question to answer because, like I said, when I had deployed, it was sort of the counterinsurgency environment. You're going after these rebel groups and there's terrorist networks that you're trying to track down too. You're trying to win support of the local populace, right? Anytime it's a counterinsurgency environment, you're relying on the local populace for information to gather intelligence on the enemy. You're doing a lot of humanitarian assistance missions, really trying to, again, win the hearts and minds of the local populace, get information so you can track down the enemy. That doesn't always work. Sometimes, no matter what you do, it doesn't have a positive effect. But I think that, by the time I was done with my deployment, we had really cleaned out a lot of the pockets of bad guys. We had really tracked down a lot of the enemy networks and either A, detain them or B, destroy them. So things felt a lot safer toward the end of my deployment. So it did feel like we made a difference. And I remember leaving there, and there was a sense of accomplishment. And you just hope that, okay, we can go home and things will kind of stay that way, right? Like the ultimate goal is to hand back the responsibility of governing that country and maintaining security. You want to be able to hand that back to the host nation government of Iraq. That's the big strategy. Go in there, get rid of all the bad guys, try to stand up the government so they can maintain themselves as a country, and train their military so that they can maintain a security posture and keep things safe. Right? And we felt like we did that. So yeah, you get the government in place, you sort of do the handshake with the Iraqi military and say, hey, okay, you guys got it from here, right? You're good. And then we leave the country. So when I was leaving, at the end of my deployment, there was a drawdown in forces. We were basically trying to get a lot of units out of Iraq so that they could govern themselves and maintain security themselves. And I think things were pretty good for the most part.
Was there a most intense battle or time during the 2 years you were abroad that really affected your view on war or bloodshed?
Can you say that question one more time?
Was there a most intense battle or time during the 2 years you were abroad that really affected your view on war or bloodshed?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that stands out the most in my mind was it was an IED attack. So again, it's a roadside bomb. And it was a, well, sorry, I take that back. It was a truck filled with like 10,000 pounds of explosives. And it drove in right into one of my like sister platoons. So basically another unit that we work very closely with, another, platoon within my same company. And this truck with 10,000 pounds of explosives, I mean, from where I was, which was pretty close, it sounded like a nuclear bomb going off. It just, with that much explosive force, it pretty much just melts whatever's like close to it. So there was a vehicle with, a handful of soldiers in it, and it ended up killing everybody in that vehicle, which was, 5 soldiers. And, I think that was probably the most catastrophic attack that I had witnessed, because, 5 guys gone just like that. It was a suicide attack. Again, big dump truck. The driver was, on a one-way mission to drive that truck straight into that convoy of vehicles to try to inflict as much damage as he possibly could. So it definitely takes its toll on the psyche of U.S. soldiers because, you know, in that sort of case, there's nothing you can do. It happens so quickly, and you know, no matter how much of a security posture you have, when you're in a very populous city and you're out there driving on the roads, and you know these roads are chaotic, there's a lot of traffic, you know, there's high-rise buildings, you know, attacks can come from all over the place. So yeah, there's not much you can do to stop an attack like that. So it gets scary. But yeah, I think that specifically you know, stood out the most in my mind.
Based on that story, would you consider yourself one of the lucky ones?
Yeah, I do. You know, there wasn't any catastrophic attacks that happened on my platoon. You know, a platoon's about 30 guys. That's sort of the basic fighting force of any military unit. You know, we definitely had our fair share of ambushes and attacks and roadside bombs, but you know, we never sustained any like major casualties. So I do consider myself to be pretty lucky.
Do you still talk to the people in your platoon?
I do, yeah. There's a few that I keep in touch with, and most of them have left the military, you know, by this point. But I think, yeah, no, we definitely maintain, you know, communication, and there's always kind of a special bond with them, you know, because we all went through very hard times together, and you know, we always had each other's backs. So that definitely forms a bond that's unrivaled by any other thing you do in life. You know, anytime you endure a hardship like that, and you're really fighting for each other's lives, yeah, that maintains a bond that spans a lifetime.
I've heard that troops were sent in by the U.S., like the UK, Japan, Poland, and like 30 other countries. So did you ever fight with troops sent in by a different country?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. No, I didn't fight directly with them, but you know, we knew that they were conducting operations in nearby regions, and that's usually how the military works. It kind of looks at an area and says, okay, well, you know, the U.S. is going to have forces here, and you know, Britain is going to have forces here in this region, and Australia is going to put their forces in this other region over here. So everybody is kind of responsible for their area of operation. So I didn't directly have contact with these other countries, but we knew they were close by, and we knew that, you know, they were part of the overall effort.
How did you like being in the military?
Yeah, I mean, it's got its ups and downs. Again, I think that you have the sense that you're fighting for a very noble cause. So it's very meaningful to be part of this huge organization and to be fighting for your country and to be part of history. But you know, there's definitely the downside too. There's a lot of you know, the pain and anguish that comes with being in combat, the harsh conditions, you know, being in the cold, having all the sleepless nights, you know, even when you're back stateside, you're doing a lot of training that eats up a lot of your time. You might go and do a training exercise for 4 or 5 weeks, and you know, you're away from your family, and so it's kind of go all the time, and then you deploy for a year or longer, and then you come back and you sort of go through that whole process all over again. So, you know, I'd say that's the downside, just how taxing it is, and then the danger that comes with it. But yeah.
Have you got any interesting war stories that you would like to share?
Let's see. Interesting war stories. Yeah, I mean, I I mean, I can share kind of a funny time, you know. So there was an explosion that went off, and nobody really knew like where this explosion came from or exactly what it was. And there was 2 Iraqi units next to each other, and they started blaming each other for you know, whose watch it happened on. And I remember coming up and witnessing them like basically pointing in each other's faces like, hey, like, you were supposed to be watching this road, like, no, you were, like, this was your responsibility, you were supposed to be watching this area, like, you let this bomb go off. And as it later turns out, it wasn't actually like an enemy bomb that went off. It was another Iraqi unit that was, they were taking some other unexploded bombs. Basically, you know, anytime you find like a landmine or something, you collect it and then you take it off somewhere to be disposed of. You detonate it. You do it in a kind of a safe fashion. So they came up and they were like, hey, you know what? We were just detonating some old landmines. Like, that was the explosion that you heard. So just to watch the confusion on everybody's faces, I thought was kind of humorous. But yeah, it really kind of it feels like you're in the Twilight Zone sometimes. A lot of like these different units don't communicate with each other. Like a lot of the Iraqi units don't communicate with each other, and then they do things, and nobody's really tracking what's going on. So I'm just kind of witnessing this comical event of them about to like tear each other's heads off, when all along, yeah, like there was really nothing wrong. It was just a unit that was doing their proper procedure. They just didn't really tell anybody what was going on.
So you told me off camera that you were also in the military in 2014 to 2015?
Yeah, so that was sort of the later years that I was in the military, and by this time I had chosen to leave the infantry and actually become a psychological operations officer. So, you know, basically my job was to do propaganda, make videos, any sort of media that that bolsters public support and confidence in what the U.S. military might be doing in a certain country. Basically, make ourselves look good, and then also highlight what the enemy is doing. You know, any atrocity that the enemy is committing, and make them look as bad as possible. Because sometimes people don't really know who the bad guys are and who the good guys are. So, you know, my job as a psychological operations officer is to really try to control the narrative and paint the picture, paint the positive things that the U.S. military is doing and what we're doing to help out the people of that country, and then make the enemy look as bad as possible.
How was it rejoining after a few years off?
Well, no, I had never left the military.
Oh, okay.
You know, the first 3 years I spent in the military as an infantry officer, and then after, you know, that 3 years or so, I decided to kind of join a different job in the military. So the first 3 years spent as an infantry officer, and then the last 5 years was spent as a psychological operations officer. So you know, I think 2014 and 2015, where that kind of becomes full circle, is around that time frame. I was assigned to Iraq again, and sort of helping out with some of the missions that we were carrying out in Iraq at that time. Because when I had, so go back to my first deployment, right? When I had left that country, we thought that we had left it in good hands. We thought that the government was stable, the military was stable, the Iraqi military was stable, and that they were going to handle things from that point forward. But it turns out that ISIS was starting to really organize their operations. So as soon as the U.S. military started to pull out of Iraq, they started to gain momentum. ISIS really started to gain momentum, and they waited for their chance to launch their military operation, almost like a blitzkrieg. Like they just went from city to city, from village to village, and took out those Iraqi army units as quick as possible. And the Iraqi units were so caught off guard, it all happened so fast, that they pretty much just dropped their weapons and fled. So ISIS, they just roll into these major cities, set up their flags, set up their headquarters, and bam, now they're in charge. And around 2014, when all this happened, I remember like, holy cow, like I was just in Mosul a few years prior. I thought things were good, and now ISIS like came out of nowhere and they took everything, they completely took everything over. So yeah, 2014, 2015, my new assignment was basically, hey, try to help out with this whole new military campaign to oust ISIS and regain stability in those regions.
So which job was better suited towards you?
I definitely prefer the psychological operations job. There was a lot of creativity involved with it, as far as coming up with video campaigns, radio campaigns, flyers, leaflets, it's sort of this mixed media approach of trying to persuade and influence a population, for me, populations in Iraq, try to gain their support so they could support the U.S. military efforts in Iraq and get them to turn their backs on ISIS. Because ISIS, their propaganda game was something that we had never really seen before. They were really good at conducting these TV campaigns, these social media campaigns, and getting people to to support them, getting people to kind of rally behind them and be able to recruit large amounts of people. So I think that was kind of the first time in history that we had seen a terrorist network or this paramilitary group really develop a sophisticated social media or mixed media advertising presence to recruit and get people on their side. And that was scary, to see how many people they were recruiting on a monthly basis and to see how many areas they were able to dominate so quickly. That was scary. It wasn't just limited to parts of Iraq. They went into Syria and did the same thing there. So yeah, I think to see them, when they first kicked off their military offensive, when ISIS first kicked off their military offensive in Mosul, that was extremely scary to see because such a huge city, millions of people, big Iraqi military presence there, and they took out that city just within a few days. So yeah, as you can imagine, that was like the #1 priority of the U.S. military, ISIS.
Yes. Did you ever come across anyone who was incredibly brainwashed by ISIS, and how did you deal with that? Like with the propaganda posters and videos?
I not face to face, no, but you would even hear about people leaving America to go join ISIS. Civilians in the U.S. leaving to go join ISIS. And they attracted just large swaths of people from all kinds of countries, from Europe, from the Middle East, from Africa. It was like this trend almost, like people thought it was cool. So yeah, no direct contact with these people, but just indirectly from just people I knew in the military who had direct exposure with them and things like that. Yeah.
So how big of a threat would you consider ISIS today?
Not so much of a threat anymore. I think we had really got a hold of them and took out most of their territory by like the end of 2017. So it took a couple years to sort of rally together allies. The Kurdish, for instance, and other rally together the Iraqi army, the Kurdish military, and try to go after ISIS on like this unified front. So yeah, I think after a couple years we finally got a handle on things, and really had them on the run. And they lost all their major headquarters, all their strongholds. We defeated most of their major military equipment. All their sources of funding were drying up. So I think that they haven't been much of a threat since late 2017. But I think history goes to show that it's like as soon as you take your finger off of them, as soon as you don't pay attention to a particular area, that threat can really bounce back quickly.
Is there a specific example of a threat bouncing back that you would like to share? Like, is there something that you could relate ISIS to?
Something that I could relate ISIS to.
Like a worldwide event that has happened before.
Well, yeah. I mean, I can. If you look at sort of the recent threats in Iraq, the past couple months, there were Shiite groups. It's a sect of Islam, right? You have Sunnis and Shiites and a few other groups there. So you have Shiite groups in Iraq who carried out attacks against one of our embassies there in Baghdad, and who also conducted a few other attacks on U.S. military personnel and U.S. allies there. I think these threats, they were backed by Shiite, or they were backed by Hezbollah groups. Hezbollah is sort of this military force that's really present in Hezbollah and a few other Middle Eastern countries. Hezbollah has a big presence in Lebanon, and they also have a presence in a few other Middle Eastern countries, and ultimately they're backed by Iran. So they get a lot of their weapons, a lot of their funding from Iran. It's all linked to the Shiite groups, to these Hezbollah groups in Iraq who carried out those attacks. And I think for the longest time, they weren't a threat. We thought that they were pretty tame there. We thought that there wasn't really anything to worry about. But things can change so quickly. All of a sudden, our relationship with Iran can go south. Any sort of political gains that we've had with Iran or Hezbollah, that stuff can turn very quickly. And then, what we thought was sort of a stable relationship proves to be, disastrous. It proves to be, we take more steps back than we've gained. So, yeah. So I think that really surprised me. Just when I thought that things were good there, it flared up within just a matter of weeks. And then factor in that we took out, I think his name is Soleimani. He was the Quds Force commander He was the Iranian Quds Force commander, and basically they go into other countries and they help train up Shiite rebels to try to carry out attacks against whatever host nation military forces in that country. So we knew that he was in Iraq, and we went after him and we killed him. And as a result, that really strained our relationship with Iran, and there was a big tension there for a while, and we were carrying out sort of these back and forth attacks between our two countries.
So, back to 2015. So what prompted you to make the decision, the very hard decision, might I add, of leaving the military?
It was a tough decision. I think that I had sort of paid my dues. I had seen a lot of things, done a lot of things, had a lot of positive results, through the various assignments that I had and the deployments that I had, and I was happy with what I did, and I thought that by 2015 it was time to make a change and leave the military and try to have a normal civilian life. By that time I had a family and kids, and the deployments were getting harder and harder to do. So yeah, I guess just leave that behind me and try to have a normal civilian life.
If any chaotic things happened in the U.S. where the military would have to respond, do you think you would ever enlist again?
Probably not, unless it was just so severe that World War III breaks out and they just need any person available, but I would say no. I think I did my time, and I'm kind of getting old at this point. I'm 36, so they would probably tell me I'm too old.
All right. Thank you for this interview. It was very nice meeting you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks.